image like no other, inspiring decades of research and debate. The Shroud of Turin, that's a piece of history, and it has an
In a quiet lab in Italy, a team of researchers made a discovery they never expected. Hidden in the ancient fibers of the Shroud of Turin were markings, not stains, not dirt, but letters. Ancient letters that speak a name tied to the most important event in history, the resurrection of Jesus Christ. For centuries, the Shroud has divided believers and skeptics. Praised by some as the very burial cloth of Christ, dismissed by others as a medieval fake. But this was different. These letters were not painted. They were part of the fabric itself. What could they mean? The discovery of these faint inscriptions sent shockwaves through the research community. They weren't random marks. Under advanced imaging, the shapes began to align into recognizable letters, some in Latin, others in Greek. One word stood out: Nazarene. It was as if the cloth itself was identifying the man it once covered. This wasn't something a medieval forger would have thought to include. In fact, historians note that during the Middle Ages, no Christian artisan would dare refer to Jesus simply as the Nazarene without including titles like Lord or Christ. Such omission would have been seen as heresy. That detail alone hinted at a much older origin, one closer to the time and culture of the first century. But the implications went even further. The placement of these letters wasn't random. They appeared near the face, exactly where Jewish burial customs often placed a separate piece of cloth bearing the name of the deceased. Over centuries, if laid in contact with the shroud, the ink could have faintly transferred to the linen fibers, leaving behind this ghostly trace. To the scientists, this was an archaeological puzzle. To the faithful, it was something more. A whisper from history connecting the relic to the very tomb described in the Gospels. But could science confirm it?
To understand why this new finding is so explosive, we have to step back into the long, tangled history of the Shroud of Turin. Its story begins, at least in recorded history, in 14th century France, in the small village of Liry. There, a French knight named Geoffrey de Charny unveiled a cloth bearing the faint image of a crucified man. Pilgrims traveled for miles to see it, believing it to be the burial shroud of Jesus. Yet from the very beginning, it faced fierce opposition. A local bishop accused it of being a forgery, claiming it was nothing more than a painted trick. Despite the controversy, the shroud passed through noble hands, eventually becoming the property of the powerful House of Savoy. In 1532, disaster struck. A fire ripped through the chapel where it was stored, scorching the linen and leaving a pattern of triangular burns along its edges. The damage was repaired by nuns, but some researchers believe these repairs and the contamination from the fire later distorted carbon dating results. By 1578, the shroud had found a new home in Turin, Italy, where it remains to this day. Through wars, fires, and centuries of doubt, it has survived, its image still mysterious, its secrets still locked within the weave of its fibers. And now, those secrets are beginning to speak. What truly sets the Shroud of Turin apart from every other religious relic is the image itself. A faint, sepia-toned outline of a man's body, front and back, stretching from head to foot. At first glance, it seems simple, even unremarkable. But under scientific scrutiny, it becomes something no artist has ever been able to reproduce. The man appears to have been crucified, wounds on the wrists and feet, abrasions across the shoulders, a deep gash in the side. The bloodstains are real human blood, type AB, and they align perfectly with the injuries described in the gospel accounts of Jesus' death. More strangely, the image is not painted, drawn, or dyed.
It sits on the very surface of the linen fibers, affecting only the topmost threads, as though it had been seared into place by a burst of light or energy. When scientists used 3D imaging technology, they discovered something else. The image contains depth information, like a three-dimensional photograph. Every contour of the body, every fold of the cloth is encoded in light and shadow that no medieval technique could have achieved. For skeptics, this is an enigma without a satisfying answer. For believers, it is something far more, perhaps the first and only record of the resurrection itself. But if this was truly the moment life returned, then how was it captured? Over the decades, teams of scientists from around the world have tried to unlock the shroud's secret. The most famous effort came in 1978, when the Shroud of Turin research project brought dozens of specialists to Turin for 5 days of intensive study. They examined everything: the weave of the linen, the chemical composition of the fibers, the nature of the stains. One thing became clear: no known artistic method could produce the image. There was no brushwork, no pigment soaked into the threads. The coloring was so superficial it penetrated only a few microns, thinner than a human hair. Whatever created it did so without heat scorching the fibers and without any substance resting on the cloth. Some theorized it was caused by a burst of radiation, a flash of ultraviolet light so intense it imprinted the body's form without burning the fabric. Others suggested it was the result of some unknown natural process, something science hasn't yet discovered. But there is one observation that unsettles both skeptics and believers alike: the figure's posture. His hair falls naturally to the sides as it would if he were standing, not lying down. There's no sign of the body's weight pressing into the cloth. If the shroud captures a real event, then maybe it is capturing the instant of rising. But could anything in history match that moment?
The mystery of the Shroud of Turin deepens when the investigation moves from the lab to the land where the story began, Jerusalem. Among the most compelling findings are microscopic traces of dirt and dust embedded in the fibers, concentrated around the feet, knees, and nose of the image. Under analysis, this dust was found to contain a rare form of limestone known as aragonite, a match to the type found almost exclusively in and around the old city of Jerusalem. This limestone match isn't vague guesswork. It aligns almost perfectly with samples taken from near the Damascus Gate, a location only a short walk from Golgotha, the site identified in Scripture as the place of Jesus' crucifixion. For archaeologists, this is a fingerprint in stone, connecting the shroud to the very ground where the Passion unfolded. The dirt around the knees suggests the man may have fallen forward, scraping them against the earth. Combined with shoulder abrasions and back wounds, it paints a vivid picture. A man carrying something heavy, likely a wooden beam, stumbling under its weight. Blood and soil are interwoven into the fabric, telling a silent story that echoes the Gospel's description of Jesus' final walk to Calvary. To skeptics, these could be coincidences. For others, they are fragments of a larger truth buried in history. And that truth is about to get even more startling. When forensic experts studied the image on the shroud, they began to see a haunting alignment between its wounds and the biblical description of Jesus' crucifixion. Across both shoulders are wide abrasions, consistent with carrying a heavy, rough object. These marks match the kind of damage a Roman crossbeam would inflict on bare skin. Lower down, the knees bear the signature of impact injuries: swelling, scrapes, and embedded dirt. These suggest falls, perhaps under the crushing weight of the beam. On the wrists, not the palms, are puncture wounds about 1 centimeter across. This detail startled historians. Medieval art almost always depicted nails through the hands, but archaeological evidence shows Romans drove nails through the wrists to support a body's weight. Then, there is the elliptical wound on the right side,
measuring about 2 inches across, perfectly matching the size and shape of a Roman lance head. Around it, the stains show a clear separation of blood and serum, a phenomenon that occurs after death and is exactly what the Gospel of John describes: blood and water flowing from Jesus' side. Every mark, every trace of injury on the shroud seems to retell a single story, a story written not in ink, but in human suffering. But what about the moment after the suffering, the instant of transformation? Some of the most intriguing research on the Shroud of Turin comes from scientists in Italy who noticed something strange in the image: tiny variations, almost like frames in a strobe photograph. When analyzed, these shifts suggest that the man's body was not completely still when the image formed. There are slight changes in the position of the hands, chest, and feet, movements too subtle for the naked eye, but visible through enhanced imaging. To the researchers, this hinted at something extraordinary. If the shroud truly wrapped a dead body, such motion shouldn't be there. But if it captured a moment of transformation, a body no longer bound by death, then these changes could be the silent evidence of life returning. Adding to the mystery, the image only affects the topmost fibers of the cloth, as though made by an intense burst of light or energy that radiated outward without burning the fabric. Some have likened it to a photographic negative created in an instant. Others see it as the physical echo of the resurrection, that split second when mortality gave way to immortality. If true, the shroud would not just be a burial cloth. It would be the only artifact in history to record the very moment death was defeated. But is there more hidden within its threads? Advanced imaging has revealed that the Shroud of Turin holds more than just an image. Faintly, in areas near the face, researchers have detected ancient letters, some in Latin, others in Greek. The clearest word to emerge is Nazarene, a direct reference to Jesus of Nazareth.
These letters don't appear painted or embroidered. They seem to have transferred naturally, possibly from another cloth laid over the shroud during burial. In first-century Jewish custom, it was common to place a separate piece of fabric bearing the deceased's name over the face, both for identification and as a mark of honor. Over time, the ink could have lightly imprinted itself onto the linen below, leaving these ghostly traces. For historians, the wording is significant. In the Middle Ages, no devout Christian artisan would refer to Jesus simply as Nazarene, without titles like Lord or Christ. To omit them would have risked accusations of heresy. This points to an origin closer to the 1st century, when such simple identifiers were common. The script style matches handwriting found on ancient documents from the Middle East, lending further weight to the shroud's antiquity. For believers, these faint letters feel like a whisper from the past, a hidden signature linking the cloth to the tomb described in the Gospels. And yet, the most important clue is not in the fabric, but in what it represents. All the evidence, the wounds, the dirt, the rare limestone, the mysterious image, the hidden letters, points to a single moment in history: the resurrection of Jesus Christ. For Christians, this is not just a hopeful tradition, it is the foundation of faith. If Christ rose from the dead, death itself was conquered, and the promise of eternal life became real. The Gospels describe that morning with awe. Women approaching the tomb, the heavy stone rolled away, an angel declaring, "He is not here, he is risen." For Mary Magdalene, it was personal. She recognized him only when he spoke her name. That moment has echoed through centuries, offering hope to the broken, courage to the fearful, and purpose to the lost. The Shroud of Turin, if authentic, is more than cloth. It is a silent witness, a visual testimony burned into linen at the very instant life triumphed over death. It is history meeting eternity, science brushing against the divine. And yet, the shroud's story is not finished. There are still fibers untested, markings unexplored, mysteries hidden in its weave. Somewhere within those threads, answers wait, answers that could shake faith and history again. And when they emerge, will the world be ready to face the truth they reveal?